To what extent is Nigerian politics impacted by its colonial history? Let's try and find out.
Hey bro, since we're talking about colonization, isn't your shirt cultural appropriation?
Listen bro, I'm Egyptian. I could be head of the African Union, you know what I mean? The British were a major player in the story of Nigeria's colonization, and they took it over slowly. British trade with local tribes began in the 17th century. They traded palm oil, palm kernels, and slaves. Millions of slaves were shipped out of Lagos, the largest port city in the country, with 3.5 million slaves shipped from Nigeria to America during the transatlantic slave trade. But the abolition of slavery in 1807 changed things. To expand business interests, the Brits began military campaigns inland, defeating the Sokoto Caliphate, the Yebu Kingdom, the Edo Empire, and the people of Igbo land. They officially took control of what is roughly modern Nigeria in 1885 and divided the land into a northern and southern protectorate, which had a profound impact on life and society in the region.
So what now, bro?
What now?
Now it's time to divide and conquer, sire.
The North and the South had two very distinct trajectories. The British took a more active role in the development of the South, which had ports, fertile farmlands, and recently discovered lucrative oil fields. The Protectorate covered regions traditionally held by the Igbo and Yoruba people. Colonial officers in the region built medical and police departments and invested in a European education for the locals, as well as infrastructures such as roads and railways. Their investment reflected the empire's ambitions to make the South key to British economic interests. The region had also been receptive to Christian missionaries, with Igbo people in particular converting in large numbers. The North, however, was not as resource-rich as the South, and so the British preferred to maintain indirect rule so they can still collect taxes. And indirect rule meant colonial officers allowed local leaders to remain in power, as long as they answered to the British commanding officers. The North, a majority Muslim region dominated by the House of Fulani people, rejected westernization and Christian missionaries, preferring instead to preserve their Muslim identities. The English implemented changes to the currency, language, and tax system, and this fostered a new economy which forced locals to shift from self-sustaining farming to wage labor. The Northerners, who had fewer labor opportunities, were at a distinct disadvantage. This, coupled with their rejection of English education, resulted in widespread illiteracy and poverty. These differences defined relations between the two regions. In 1914, the Brits decided to unite the North and the South. The two protectorates were now made one colony. Before the creation of a united Nigeria, tribes lived autonomously, and while they may have warred from time to time, the territorial integrity of each tribe was largely respected. But now suddenly, they were competing to have a say over who would exert more control over a newly imagined, larger country. This tension has played out multiple times since independence was gained in 1960. In 1966, a coup led by Igbo loyal military leaders took control of the country. But a counter-coup by military leaders loyal to the North attempted to wrestle back control. The tensions escalated into a civil war in 1967, when the Igbo from the South, being violently persecuted at the time, declared independence and claimed much of the land in the southeast, including the lucrative oil fields there, calling it the Republic of Biafra. The war was eventually won by the Nigerian government, but not before thousands died due to an imposed blockade. A series of military dictatorships followed until 1999, when Nigeria transitioned into a democracy. The rivalry between the North and South was routinely reflected in the ruling parties and their presidential candidates, with Northern and Southern presidents rotating since the elections began. And since 2002, each of these presidents had to contend with local militants, most prominent of all being Boko Haram, a northeastern-based group whose major purpose is to eradicate Western influence in Nigeria, reflected in their name, which literally translates to Western education is sin. Their violence has become a major factor in recent elections. But they aren't the only militants in Nigeria, with southern groups such as the Niger Delta Avengers and the Movement for the Emancipation of the Niger Delta seeking to take back control of oil fields in the South. All in all, the rivalry between the North and the South that emerged out of colonial Nigeria continues to define the country's politics. But the question is, for how much longer?